Well, welcome back from lunch. Hopefully everybody is re-energized and refreshed as opposed to sleepy, because we have a great topic to cover for the next 30 minutes, and we have a great set of panelists. So the title of this session is titled as Artificial Intelligence in Medicine. Is it our Gutenberg moment? And I think the reason we thought about putting in the title is, if you guys, obviously, as most of you know, the printing press was an incredible product in that, like most products, it was better, faster, cheaper. But what's more interesting about the printing press was it actually did a lot more than that. It's transformative only because it was enabling technology that really democratized this process of learning and led to a social and cultural revolution. And I think you can all imagine how artificial intelligence, there's a lot been said and written about how it potentially is also enabling innovation that can democratize clinical care, at least as it relates to medicine, and potentially lead to transformation of healthcare delivery. But I think for today, I think what we wanted to focus on is not so much all the possibilities and potential and the hype around AI, but really talk a little more in detail about the pathway, the road to impact, and how do you actually execute on this technology to drive impact in medicine. So with that background, maybe we can start to my left, and we'll have the panelists introduce themselves, and maybe as you do that, give one example of artificial intelligence in healthcare that you are currently working on, maybe.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Mark Michalski. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Clinical Data Science, Brigham and Mass General. I'm a radiologist by training, but I've spent the last couple of years mostly as early stage operational lead. One thing that we're doing in artificial intelligence right now is we're working on validation strategies. So I think, ever since 2012, when essentially deep learning kind of took off, we've seen increasing momentum in the application of that technology in all fields, including our own in healthcare. And we're now at this point where there are products. There are models, and many of these products have resulted from a lot of work, now are having their moment, their validation moment. Does this thing actually work? Yeah. Is it actually useful? And so one of the things that we're working on at the center, beyond creating the technology, is a similarly challenging problem, in some ways even more challenging, frankly. It's like, how do you make sure that these things are effective and safe?
Great. Mintu?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mintu Chirakia. I am an associate professor at Stanford, where I run our Center for Digital Health. Clinically, I'm an electrician. I'm a cardiac electrophysiologist and do ablations and implant devices. Some of the things we're working on is kind of a spectrum of observational data to clinical trials. And we haven't gotten to the point where we're going live with AI in trials as interventions. But what we are interested in around my area of atrial fibrillation is risk stratifying and improving the risk stratification of who gets what types of therapies and predicting disease trajectories. And that really, the strong emphasis is around stroke in atrial fibrillation, and really looking at the problem by deciding not who should get anticoagulation, but who can safely not have it. We're also looking to automate ECG and arrhythmia classification in the electrophysiology lab.
Awesome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Wout. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Deep6 AI. We were originally not a healthcare company. We came from the US intelligence community. We built one of the probably first AI platforms for one of the biggest agencies out there. Pivoted into healthcare last year, taking our technology and our platform there. Honestly, finding that the data in healthcare is much more amenable to AI solutions than out there because it's so vertical. It's so confined in its feature space, which is great for it. We took our platform, we went through an accelerator with Cedars-Sinai and Techstars, and we thought very hubristically that we were going to do some kind of a collective medical intelligence using AI for that. Then we found out that there are market mechanisms and commercial things that would slow that down significantly. So the first product that we built on our platform, or the first application really, is the use of AI to match patients at a very granular level with clinical trials. It's something that actually pays off fairly quickly, it's fairly easily, it shows immediate results, and it's a big problem. It's basically a blocker for innovation in general. We do have ideas and a roadmap of other tools and products we're building on. We can probably touch on that later.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you for the introductions. One thing that comes up all the time is when you read the lay press, it feels like artificial intelligence is sort of this panacea. We can solve everything in healthcare. And the reality is that's just not true. So let's talk a little bit about how do you identify a good use case? Like, what are the core components that you need to actually identify a problem that maybe AI is really well equipped to address? And that has to be either the clinical unmet need, the data, or the talent. But can you, Mark, talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go down the line.
Yeah, sure. So it's true. I think a lot of the people that approach us look at machine learning or artificial intelligence kind of like pixie dust. You have a problem, you kind of sprinkle it over the top, and the problem disappears. And unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. It also turns out that artificial intelligence, a lot of the reason we're talking about artificial intelligence is actually because of a pretty narrow set of tools in machine learning that just happen to be very powerful and generalizable. But a lot of what we sort of think of as predictive modeling and all the rest is actually statistics that have kind of been around for a long time. So when I think about what can we attack with this technology, I first look at it from a technological perspective. Is this something that I need a CovNet to build, or can I do this with logistic regression? So it's kind of like a technology question, but then it's all the other things that you discussed, which are, is this clinical and beyond technical feasibility, frankly, is it clinically relevant? And is it market viable? And as a professor, that's a weird thing to talk about sometimes. But when we're talking about scalability, does this technology is it actually something that scale to the rest of the world? You have to think about those sorts of things. So we think about, is it technologically feasible? Is it clinically relevant? So is this going to help the clinicians and my fellow diagnosticians? And is it market viable? Is it something that is going to be scalable? Open source it, or?
And Minttu, can you talk about that a little bit, but also maybe focusing on the talent part as well? Because I think the skill sets, there's a relatively new techniques. And as somebody who in academic medicine, if you want to address it for cardiovascular medicine, how do you actually create a team around this to address the topic? It's not that simple, getting the data and the team to work together.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, everyone says they have their next convolutional neural network and it shows something, but making a multi-layered CNN is a bit like finger painting. So you have to dial the inputs, and two people can come up with two very different AI algorithms, but they may end up accomplishing the same thing. There isn't really consensus on how to build these technologies, so you are relying on talent. Talent is hard across the board in academic centers where these skill sets, when you're at Stanford and you have all the companies around that can throw stock options and greater salaries, it's a challenging environment to be in. And so you leverage the talent pool end to end from the students all the way up and partner with companies. And then back to the other question, I think, for me as a cardiologist, it's sort of let's walk first and then run later. So I view this as assistive, not artificial. And what can we do that people in the healthcare system hate doing? Most cardiologists don't enjoy reading ECGs. It's a fact. There's few that do, and that's great, but usually you get to do that at random moments that's tacked onto a busy schedule. And yet, while people do, that reimbursement is critical for salary support, it's not something that's fun. So how do you assist, automate, streamline, make it faster? Another thing that people hate to do is OR scheduling. People do not, ask any OR nurse. They don't enjoy figuring out what goes in what room. But that's something where AI is a low regulatory risk, if no regulatory risk, and can solve problems of inefficiencies because you can get inputs about, which days went long, which days went short with all the inputs, and all of a sudden you might have a better schedule. So I think you want to use this to solve problems in healthcare before we, present it as a crystal ball to patients.
Agreed. And talk a little bit about your choice of, it sounds like you're in a different industry, had this platform, and how you decided, and you pivoted actually, to get to clinical trials, and why that specific use case, and what else did you consider?
It was like a multi-stage pivot. It's like a slow falling off a cliff in a way, actually. You're leaning, suddenly like gravity does it takes its toll. We started in the intelligence community because they had some really challenging problems. In intelligence, you're looking at all the data all the time, often low veracity, high volume, high variety, etc. Right? So it's a challenging problem. at some point, we decided that our sense of humor didn't really coincide with that of our sponsors, our government sponsors. And when they told us, oh, you guys are doing great, the next step you should do is you should actually hire a retired 4-star general, start knocking on some doors, are you going to be all that? And we just like, never. I mean, the word retired 4-star general knocking on some doors, like, we're out. So we immediately started to think of other stuff. My co-founder and chief data scientist did biomathematics at UCLA School of Medicine, so we had some background there. And we early on realized one of the big issues with, or one of the big opportunities actually with healthcare is the preponderance of unstructured data. There's so much unstructured data in healthcare, right? 90% of the data, as many claim, and it's riddled with PHI, which makes it really hard to clean up and to deal with and to kind of bring it together. So we felt like at a very high level, the government and industry together had spent $160 billion on digitizing all of that data, all of that clinical data. So you think there would be big data in healthcare. If you look at healthcare, there is no big data. If you compare it to finance or other industries, right, there is none. What you have are massive amounts of little data locked and fragmented in all of these files. And we feel the fact that so much of the data is unstructured and riddled with PHI is part of that problem. So we felt what we could do is something really, really different from what is out there. Throw away all of the document-based relational databases where you have all of that nasty unstructured data and start representing patients as a graph. So what we do is we use a variety of different techniques, right? From NLP to different types of machine learning, deep learning, actually link analysis, community building, etc. And we take out all the relevant features that are clinical out of the files, like what are the symptoms, diagnosis, outcomes, treatments, omics, lifestyle choices, anything as a relevant feature, and we post that on the graph. The nice thing now is once you have a graph of a patient, you can cherry pick what you want to see, you can leave out all of the PHI, and you can start comparing patients with others. Show me other patients like this. Show me what all the patients that have like a diagnosis of ALS have in common, and that sets them apart from other patients that don't have that but have similar symptoms. So you can do a lot about that. So that's why we initially thought we're going to use this for some clinical decision support, collective medical intelligence. You can reference every patient against all the other patients that have a similar graph, and then we met the reality of healthcare. So that's when we pivoted again, called like our smaller pivot, and changed our alpha products to do a very simple problem that was still very big actually, find patients that meet all of these very specific criteria for clinical trials or other types of cohorts.
Got it.
And that was very, very simple. One thing I wanted to maybe just mention in terms of actual AI, based on what both of you actually said, a lot of people, when they hear AI, they think about some general AI, like you need a HAL or something, or an all-encompassing intelligence that rivals our own. Our brain has evolved, right, through time, but it's basically a system of synergistic systems and modules, right? AI is the same thing. Today we're talking about a couple of techniques, like you mentioned, mostly deep learning now and CNNs, etc. And these can be applied to specific problems like classification, optimization, those kind of things. There is no generalized AI yet that can be like your AI doctor, right? Or Dr. AI, you can ask any type of questions. I think eventually that will come, but it will be the same step as the evolution of our brain. It will be like a meta model that kind of combines all of these synergistic systems and can learn to work together. But I think that's far off. So today the focus is really, can you find very specific classification optimization problems that actually you can run your model, you can model to, and can you find a good business case for that or a good use case for that? And I would say that traditional statistics and analytics and workflow issues are just as important as the AI. But it's bringing all of that together that gives you like the lift over more traditional methods.
Agree, thank you. By the way, I'll have one more question, but I do want to open this up, unlike other previous sessions, to the audience early on. I want to make sure this is more engaging, and I know it's a hot topic, so you guys may have a lot of questions for our panelists, so please feel free to come up to the podium if you have questions. But one thing I want to get back to, Mintu, you mentioned this, you used the word assistive intelligence, or assisting the doctor as opposed to artificial intelligence. I think this is important because one of the things I worry a lot about, at least that's a saying in healthcare, that it takes on average 17 years to translate any evidence-proven technology to actually wide-scale adoption. Right? If you look at even the early days of aspirin and heart attack, at 12 years after the first publication, I think Greg Fonda wrote this big paper, there was still less than 50% use of aspirin. It just takes a long time. So let's talk about how do we drive adoption of AI? Because there's clearly a threat here, right? On sort of roles and responsibilities of physicians, and how do you actually get people to adopt this technology if it's shown to be proven, but what's the pathway look like? Why don't you start?
It's a tool like anything else. I mean, more broadly stated, an AI is like a fellow. They're going to, it's designed to help you. And so maybe to do the things you don't enjoy doing first call. But really, I'm saying that half jokingly, but it's really the view of how people view these tools and how they see that. So we already have what you might want to call AI when you read ECGs. You know, these systems give you provisional diagnoses. Turns out that maybe those analog-based systems for signal detection are incomplete, they don't work well, there's a lot of issues, and so can you do better? And so the reason I think assistive is important is the first thing you have to be clear on is whether the AI system is recapitulating the human experience of knowledge. And one way to do that is to look at the misclassifications. What did the AI get wrong? And is that the same stuff that humans get wrong? And so you can look at confusion matrices. And what's very interesting in the ECG world is the algorithms are misclassifying and getting things wrong as the same as doctors do. So they're not making egregious errors that are nonsensical. And so if you have refined your AI to be similar, that is a layup for an assist. Over time, over evolution, maybe that can be independent. But I think that's the first step, is to verify, not just, since you can't get under the hood with a lot of AI, or most of it, is it recapitulating human error? And if it is, then that's probably okay.
Yeah. And Mark, you have background in radiology, and I think cardiovascular imaging is sort of ripe for disruption here. If you think about the amount of time that we spend in the radiology room, talk a little bit about where do you see this going, just in radiology in general, but more specific, maybe cardiovascular imaging.
Yeah, so a lot of the early work actually in the application of CovNets in imaging was actually done in cardiac imaging. So the Data Science Bowl is a good example. In data science, we like to do things through competitions and give data sets and try to create models through those competitions. And the very first big one was in the healthcare space was using deep nets to automate the process of segmenting the LV.
That's right.
And I think it's actually emblematic of a couple of both the possibilities and the challenges of this space. The possibilities being that the model that was created with a pretty sparse data set with very little data actually performed pretty well. Now the challenge is that it was the best model was constructed by two young engineers who subsequently went off to a hedge fund, and we haven't heard about the model since. And so and that's the challenge,
surprise,
right?
Surprise.
Yeah, surprise. And I mean, that's really the challenge is here. Now you have a model. How do you integrate it into the workflow? How do you validate it? How do you actually make sure that it's safe and effective and all this stuff? So I think it is ripe for disruption, but I think, to echo some of your points, Mintu, I think we have to think about it as a tool. It's when we've succeeded, you won't say, oh, my artificial intelligence is now helping us solve this problem. It's more like, oh, it's just part of my workflow. It's helping me. It's just the next version of this tool that I've been using for forever. I think that's.
So let's talk about that point a little bit about this idea of validation. We recently saw a number of publications in the last, I would say, 6 months. Google's DeepMind, and there's a bunch of other stuff. This idea that if you think about what is the gold standard for validating AI. Because we've seen before in the past, in the 80s even, when I think folks from Stanford did the clinical decision support stuff, it turns out that if you compare a new technology tool to the average physician, it sometimes outperforms them. Although the people in the ivory tower is like, well, that's really clearly not what my performance is. We're at 95%, and it's sort of not ready yet. Because even a small error rate on technology is sort of unacceptable, but we often accept what's a much larger error rate in general practice. So how do you validate something? How do you create a threshold? And what's the right threshold where you can trust clinicians would actually approve and agree with the validation design of the study? It's open to everybody. Let's start with maybe you, Mark, and then go to Mintu here.
Yeah, sure. So that is one of the grand challenges. Another thing that we recently did was we were looking at pulmonary nodule detectors, and I won't get into details there, but one of the real challenges of determining, comparing apples to apples, and you would expect a model whose purpose is to identify, a pulmonary nodule that might turn into cancer later. It's pretty stereotyped, pretty well defined, but it turns out that even that task people attacked it in different ways, different kinds of inputs, different kinds of outputs. So not only the gold standard wasn't quite defined, but sort of the product specifications were. So it's hard to compare them. I think that that part of this is first defining what we're trying to do, and then when it comes to what's good enough, I think that we'd all would like the principle to be, let's try to get it to standard of care. I think that's going to be that's often challenging.
Good enough. Yeah, I mean, what do you think?
I agree. I think it comes down to the willingness to take risk in order to get the returns of optimization and scale and a reduction in time, right? So, you can't sue you can't sue an algorithm, and you can't sue a risk score that we use in place, whether it's the CHAD score, but you can sue the person who applies that, for example. And so it's the same thing. So are people going to be willing to take on risk for the reward? If the reward is high, I think they will.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a little bit, but talk to me about, in your example of validation, is a little bit different than clinical validation, but
it is, yeah.
Did you ever go through a process of, say, validating your algorithm to say what you decide to pick as patients for clinical trials on manual review actually meet the criteria, or there's an error rate built in? Like, how do you validate?
We were perfect from the start. We didn't have to do that. No, of course. I mean, you have to, right? I mean, each use case will bring its own references and have its own validation process. You have to, because as you said, I mean, AI is something new and it's just another technique. You have to show that there's a lift over other techniques. And what we typically do, I mean, for us, it's fairly easy. The metrics are, if you're trying to find patients for trials, you can compare it to some historicals. Did we find the patients you found before? Did we find other patients? Which patients do we include, exclude, and why? And most importantly, what we found, because we were coming at it at first from our data science set, what are the precision and recall scores, et cetera, what do we do? What people really cared about there was time. How many patients do I find? How long did it take me to find them? On one of our first studies we did, and this was really in alpha, we had a non-small cell lung cancer researcher. She had been able to find and recruit 23 patients over the previous 12 months. We never met her. She gave us the criteria for the trial. We ran it against a small data set on her own database. We found 58 patients in less than 8 minutes. So yes, that's a success. Out of those 58, I think 15 were not applicable for the trial, but it was more than she had. Is it perfect? Far from it, but it's better than the alternatives. And I think that's kind of the story of AI or any technique in general, right? You kind of do this in baby steps, try to get better and better. You benchmark against, you have a distribution almost of benchmarks, depending on are you in the top 1% of practitioners or the lowers, see where do you help, and you apply it kind of at that level. For us, obviously, there's not as much at stake because we're not going to diagnose, we're not going to do other things.
So we have 8 minutes left. I just want to make sure I look at the audience. Any questions at all? Anybody want to come to the podium? Okay, otherwise I will ask one question specifically around. Oh.
No, come on up, guys.
I know, guys, come on, don't be shy.
I don't want to keep taking
here we go.
questions from
We got
Malik.
someone. Sorry, I can't see behind me here. We have 2 questions, so why don't you start here and then we'll go here next.
All right, I mean, it seems like the most well talked about AI thing is Watson. So what's your view of Watson? How's it been working out?
Sure, so I didn't want to go there, but now that we're going there, let's go there. So let's talk about some massive failures this far. So what, from your opinion, what do you think could have gone wrong, or how would you, if you're doing it all over again, how would you approach the validation or implementation of something like Watson in healthcare?
Right. I think it actually is emblematic of something that we were talking about earlier. It's like, first you have to define the product, and it's really about sort of like what problem are you trying to solve, I think the aspiration was to sort of just have a doc in a box, and it turns out that if for example. One place where I think there has been challenges for that team is basically if you're sort of boxing up a doctor in a certain kind of geography using a certain set of tools, and you sort of absorb their truth, and you sort of then try to take that box and ship it other places, not only in the same country and the same all across the world, then you're bound to have frictions there.
Right.
So to IBM's credit, they opened up a lot of the space and a lot of the dialogue, but I think some of those early challenges are pretty visible.
Me too. Thoughts?
marketing and product ahead of science. This is a common, emblematic problem in tech, and doesn't matter what tech company it is. It happens everywhere, and you know, particularly in engineering, when things are so product focused, you have product managers. That's not how we generally think of running science in the clinical research world. So with marketing getting ahead of science, you end up creating very, very high societal expectations.
Exactly.
And perhaps that's successful from the point of IBM kind of now being recognized as the people doing this. So maybe that had a strategic payoff. But that's my concern.
Yep, I absolutely agree.
I think we have a lot of thoughts about it. So we competed with IBM Watson, both in the intelligence community and here. I think one of the key things that they did is they positioned Watson as a general AI, like as this complex AI that can tackle any problem, right?
That's a good
and that's not true. It's a combination of different solutions and techniques. Some of them are not even AI. In our specific case of finding patients for clinical trials, they do that as well. And it's not AI that they're using. It's very fixed rule-based, bottoms up. That's why they started by disease type, cancer by cancer, so they can write the rules and then go there. But it's not true AI. And by having that conglomerate of different products that somehow make up this Watson and see it as one product, it's bound to disappoint in some. I'm sure there's other applications of Watson that worked really well and where they are using real good techniques. But it's just this amalgam of all of these different things, and then it's bound to fail.
Good point. Professor.
So this has been terrific. I want to ask the three clinicians. Last year marked for the first time in more than a decade applications to radiology residencies dropped. And so the question is, what are you telling today's medical students and residents as to what they should do? What should they learn along the way? What kind of experiences should they have? What kind of specialties should they go in? I mean, primary care sounds like a pretty good one because you actually have to see patients.
That's right.
Radiology maybe not so good.
Why don't we start there, and Minton, I'll go last.
Okay. All right.
Since he's pointed you out,
No,
I'll go first.
that's cool. No, so this is a really relevant question right now, and it's relevant not just only for radiology, but it's relevant for a lot of fields, right? So, I am biased, obviously, but when I think about opportunity for the future, I tend to think that the opportunity is where, again, I'm biased, but where the data is. So I think that what's likely to happen is those specialties that deal in diagnostics, whether it's radiology, pathology, echocardiography, and certain other parts of the diagnostic specialties, I tend to think that the opportunity is really about being where the data is and evolving along with it. There's no doubt that radiology, pathology, and the rest will change. And the question is, how do you change? What do you do now that you have all this data and you need to make it interpretable for the rest of the world? That's actually a grand challenge. It doesn't look like what we do today, but it still is a huge challenge. I'd also say that the technology, like you were saying, it's pretty narrow. So it's really effective at some stuff, and it's so stupid in some other ways. So we're working hard to make it smarter in all the ways that it's not working well. But I think that what you're going to find is there's going to be chunks of the discipline that kind of fall out and get replaced.
I can just say one thing there. I believe a role that I definitely see for physicians is to be that connective tissue or that meta system across different applications, because they are too narrow. If you choose a specialty that is very specific, only a classification issue, right, where you classify and do things, then it's harder because you can be replaced. But to the extent that you have a wider purview of different problems and you have that human interaction, human beings will be in the mix for a very long time to solve that.
One last comment to think about for the audience. I think the MCAT needs to include quantitative science. It's just something for you guys to think about.
Yeah.
So I'll say, I think this reminds me, Bob, of 10, 15 years ago when hospitalists were first introduced as a profession in medicine. There was a lot of pushback by the need for hospitalists, and now you can imagine the booming profession. This idea of even other roles like nurse practitioners doing some of the stuff in primary care medicine, there was a lot of pushback initially. Now we know it's an incredibly effective way to manage patients and team-based models. I think that the idea of a digital doctor or almost like a data science physician is coming. I think it's actually an opportunity to pursue that area of field of medicine as opposed to being shying away from it.
Yeah.
Question?
Yeah, so first of all, he's a fellow data scientist at SKP from National Institutes of the World.
Okay.
I was really inspired when we were talking about treating patient data as graph. It's one of the things I found missing in all of my data exploration is sort of massive graph-centric exploration of comorbidities and who disease and who's co-occurrence and the symptoms. So I'm just wondering what's your take on this, and if you're doing it, can you kind of work on that well?
We are, right? I mean, the nice thing, like you said, the nice thing about the graph is you can treat it as a hypergraph, right? You can have like distinct feature spaces that deal with comorbidities. You can kind of say, this is my feature space, say, for ALS or for prostate cancer, and what are my other feature spaces and what are the edges into that with different comorbidities. So you can model it out really easily in a graph. I would say one of the big advantages, and I don't want to go too technical, with graphs, you can basically start from the data. You don't start from a hypothesis. If you're dealing with a relational database, you start from the hypothesis and you see, can I somehow support it in the data? The graph will point you to all of the correlations, right, and all of the edges and the regressions that you can find.
Thanks. Last question.
Oh,
Mike.
I just wanted to add to the comment, probably a theme more for a different panel, but if we're going to teach medical students more about quantitative science, behavioral science is the other big thing that we learn nothing
That's right.
about in medicine.
That's right.
No, Mike.
We definitely need. So, I mean, I'm sure you weren't saying to the exclusion of that, but
No.
I doubt there's an MCAT maybe person
An audience, yeah.
but adding that.
It could be, but that maybe have greater emphasis in the process of medical training, because you may not get that in the undergrad, but during the course of medical school, it needs to be emphasized. And that intersection is being more and more emphasized at Stanford. I think in the spring we're having a course led by Nigam Shah, who's a data scientist, and Abraham Verghese, who is he's an author, he's a humanist, he's an amazing physician, and it's about humanism and AI and the intersection, which of course we could go on for.
Perfect. That was the last comment I had, so I'm glad you mentioned it. The one thing we didn't touch on is the unintended consequences of AI in healthcare. So all around professional career development, the idea of human touch and humanism in medicine. So thank you. Thank you very much to the panelists.